This story takes us back to a long time ago, to the days of high school, where I was just a quiet, unnoticeable kid. I didn't stand out much. I didn't talk a lot. My grades were average, and I only had a handful of friends. There was one person, however, who didn't like me, and that person was Lily. Lily was the one who had everything. She was pretty, smart, and adored by all the teachers. People looked at her and thought, "This girl has it all." But it's always the ones who look perfect that can be the scariest. She was the type to act sweet on the outside, but secretly tear you down if you weren't in her circle. I just tried to keep my head down and avoid drawing attention. But one day during PE class, I made a mistake. I accidentally stepped on Lily's pencil case. That was the moment everything changed. From the next day on, strange things started happening. I'd find odd scribbles on my desk, my uniform would mysteriously disappear, or I'd find my lunch container open, with food spilled everywhere. At first, I thought it was just bad luck, but it kept happening. Soon, people started avoiding me. Some even laughed when they saw my bag covered in doodles. I could hear Lily's voice behind me saying, "She's such a pain." And I felt helpless. I didn't want to tell my parents because they were always busy, and I knew they'd just tell me to focus on my studies. So I lived in silence, hiding from Lily's shadow for more than 2 years. Finally, graduation day came, and it was the last time I saw Lily's face. I swore to myself I would never deal with her again. Little did I know, fate had other plans. A few years later, I met my now husband at work. He was kind, attentive, and had this warm way about him that drew me in. We started dating, and soon the topic of marriage came up. I was drawn to him because he was the kind of person who made me feel safe, something I had longed for after all the struggles in my youth. But there was one thing that bothered me. He didn't talk much about his family. He had parents and a younger sister, but he only shared the basics. "She's strong-willed. I hope you don't mind her," he mentioned once. That was it. I wasn't worried, though. I liked him too much to let anything small like that stop me, so I agreed to marry him. Then came the day I met his sister. It was at the pre-wedding meeting, and when I saw her sitting there laughing with the guests, I froze. I couldn't believe my eyes. Her voice, her laugh, everything about her was just like Lily, 20 years later. It felt like I had been transported back to high school. She stared at me for a while, and then casually said, "Oh, it's been a while. I remember you. You're the one my brother's marrying." I was in shock. That night, I told my husband everything. "Your sister was my high school classmate," I said, "and she used to make my life miserable." At first, he didn't believe me, but then he held my hand tightly and said, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea, but I'll handle it. I won't let her bother you." I decided to let it go. I told myself the best revenge was to live well and show her that I was fine without her in my life. So, we got married. For the first few months, everything was peaceful. My husband was still as loving as ever, and I was slowly adjusting to life with his family. But his sister, Sarah, wasn't the same. At first, she only called once or twice, but then one night, she suddenly showed up at our house. It was around 11 p.m., and she called me saying, "I've had some drinks and I'm scared to go home. Can I stay with you guys? It'll be safer." Before I knew it, she was at the door, barging in as if she had every right to be there. She kicked off her shoes, sat on the couch, and said, "Hey, can you make me some instant noodles? Oh, and if you have any leftovers, I'll take them. I'll even clean up your fridge a bit." I made her the noodles, cut up some fruit, and did what I could, hoping she'd leave soon. But it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, she kept calling for the smallest of things, asking me to do her laundry or cook for her. I remember once she borrowed my bag without asking, and when I politely asked for it back, she dismissed me saying, "If you're going to act like this, don't bother keeping nice things." I couldn't believe it. She started making snide comments to my husband, too. One day, I overheard her saying, "You remember that guy I set you up with? He was a great guy, but you went for someone quieter." She would subtly put me down, even in front of our parents. But the worst part was when I found out I was pregnant. At first, my husband and I were overjoyed. We were excited, planning everything for our growing family, but that excitement was short-lived. The day after I found out I was pregnant, Sarah called again. She demanded I make kimchi stew for her, saying, "You make the best kimchi stew and Mom wants it too. Also, can you help with the laundry?" She didn't care that I was dealing with morning sickness, and when I mentioned it, she cut me off. "Oh, please, don't act like you're too sick. Everyone goes through this. You can't just lie around all day. Get up and do what I asked." I was furious, but I kept it to myself. I didn't want to cause a scene. But deep down, I knew I had to stand up for myself. I was already dealing with so much, and her attitude only added to the stress. That night, after everything, I ended up feeling physically drained. The stress was taking its toll on me, but I couldn't show it. I still had to go through the motions, making Sarah's requested stew, doing the laundry, and cleaning the house, all while trying to ignore the nausea that seemed to never leave me. The next day, something happened that changed everything. I woke up with sharp pain in my stomach. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just the effects of stress or maybe something to do with the pregnancy. But it kept getting worse, so much so that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went to the hospital as quickly as I could, and when the doctor confirmed what had happened, it felt like the world had just collapsed on me. I had miscarried. It was a huge blow, not just physically, but emotionally. My heart broke in ways I never thought possible. I was devastated, but what hurt even more was the way things had unfolded. The doctor said stress could have been a contributing factor to the miscarriage, and all I could think of was how much Sarah had been stressing me out without any care in the world for what I was going through. When I got home, my husband was there waiting for me, but instead of offering the support I so desperately needed, he said something that struck me to my core. "Sarah's probably upset too. I'm sure she didn't mean to cause you so much stress." Hearing that made me snap. "Are you seriously worried about her? She's the one who made me go through this. How can you stand by her when she treated me like this?" My husband was stunned, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of realization in his eyes. He apologized profusely and promised me that he would handle things from that point on. But that didn't ease my pain. I needed him to stand up for me, not for his sister. I needed him to understand that I was the one who had suffered, and Sarah's behavior was a huge part of it. The next few days were a blur. I was in a daze, emotionally exhausted, but I kept it together. I didn't want to burden my husband with more worries, so I buried my feelings, even though it felt like I was suffocating. I did everything I could to keep myself busy, but the weight of what had happened was constantly looming over me. Things with Sarah didn't improve either. She still made random demands, asking me to run errands for her or take care of things that she could easily do herself. But the worst part was the way she kept undermining me in front of my husband. She would make little comments about how I wasn't doing enough, as if she had the right to dictate how I should live my life. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, I finally broke down. I couldn't hold it in anymore. My husband, who had been incredibly patient and understanding up until then, just sat there quietly as I poured my heart out. I told him everything I had been feeling, the exhaustion, the hurt, the anger, and the way Sarah had pushed me to the edge. He finally understood. He promised me that he would speak to Sarah, that he would make sure she knew where the boundaries were, and that her behavior was unacceptable. But even as I heard his words, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Sarah had always gotten her way, and I wasn't sure if anything would really change. Weeks passed, and while things were quieter, they didn't improve. Sarah still showed up at our house uninvited, still made unreasonable demands, and still undermined me in subtle ways. It was as if nothing had changed, despite my husband's promises. Then one day, things took a turn I never expected. I got a call from my mother-in-law. "You need to come to the hospital," she said urgently. "It's Sarah. Something's happened." I rushed to the hospital with my husband, my heart pounding in my chest. When we arrived, we found out that Sarah had collapsed. She had been under immense stress, and the doctor confirmed that she was suffering from severe uterine contractions. It was a strange moment. I felt a part of me that wanted to feel sympathy for her, but then I remembered everything she had done to me. The way she treated me like I was nothing. The way she dismissed my pain and ignored my boundaries. My husband, on the other hand, was immediately concerned. He was worried about his sister, and he stayed by her side, comforting her as she recovered. Over the following days, Sarah seemed to be in a much more vulnerable state, I didn't know whether to feel sorry for her or angry at her for all the damage she had caused, but it was clear that things had changed. My husband seemed to be taking more control of the situation, and for the first time, he wasn't trying to play the mediator between us. He was standing up for me, which meant everything. As Sarah recovered, I started to feel a sense of closure. It was as if everything that had happened was finally starting to make sense. My husband, who had always been caught in the middle, was now fully on my side. He finally understood how much his sister had hurt me and how much I had endured in silence. But I also knew that Sarah's behavior wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. It would take time, but I was ready for it. One evening, a few weeks later, my husband came home with surprising news. "Sarah's getting married," he said. "She's met someone. They're moving fast, but I think it's a good thing for her." I didn't know how to feel. I had always hoped that one day she would find her own happiness, but a part of me wondered if she would ever truly change. As the wedding preparations began, I couldn't help but feel a little skeptical. Sarah was still Sarah, but this time, I wasn't going to let her affect me the way she used to. I had my own life now, my own family, and I was going to focus on what truly mattered. It was time to move forward. The wedding preparations moved forward rapidly. Sarah's wedding was a whirlwind of activity, with everything happening faster than anyone had expected. She started to change her appearance, buying expensive designer clothes, getting skincare treatments, and making sure she looked perfect for her big day. To be honest, it felt like everything was about her once again. I couldn't help but notice the way she was behaving, as if she was trying to prove something to everyone, including me. The night before the wedding, my husband and I had dinner, and as we were finishing, we received a call from his mom. "Sarah needs some money," she said without much explanation. "She's a bit short for the rent on her apartment. Could you help?" My husband glanced at me, and I could see the concern in his eyes. "How much does she need?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "About $50,000, she replied, casually, as if it was just a small request. We were stunned. My husband and I exchanged looks, knowing we didn't have that kind of extra cash lying around. But his mom seemed so insistent. "You know, you helped out when you got married. It's only fair to help Sarah now." That's when I realized what was going on. It wasn't about helping Sarah, it was about guilt-tripping us into doing what they wanted. I could feel my blood boiling. "We can't just keep giving her everything she asks for," I finally said. "She's old enough to figure things out on her own. We've already helped her enough." My husband was torn, but after a long conversation, he agreed that it wasn't right for us to keep enabling her. He called his mom back and told her that we wouldn't be able to help this time. She was not happy, but we stood firm. I thought that maybe this would be the turning point for Sarah. Maybe she would finally learn to stand on her own 2 feet, instead of constantly relying on others. The wedding day came, and as we arrived at the venue, the atmosphere was tense. The family was all gathered, waiting for the ceremony to begin. I noticed Sarah walking down the aisle, her face a mixture of excitement and arrogance, like she was trying to show off how perfect everything was. She looked stunning, but there was something in her eyes that seemed a little too calculating. It wasn't the look of someone in love, it was the look of someone who wanted to prove something. My husband's family was all there, sitting quietly, almost as if they were waiting for something to happen. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew that Sarah was never someone to let things go easily, especially when she didn't get what she wanted. I had a feeling that the night wouldn't end as smoothly as everyone hoped. After the ceremony, there was a reception, and Sarah made sure to surround herself with her friends, showing off her new life. She kept mentioning her new husband's wealth, his business ventures, and how she was finally getting the life she deserved. I couldn't help but notice how different she was from the shy, quiet girl I once knew. It was as if she had reinvented herself, but not in a good way. As the night wore on, my husband and I slipped away from the crowd for a moment to gather our thoughts. We had been through so much already, and I could tell that he was just as tired of the constant drama as I was. "Do you think she's really happy?" I asked him. "It just feels like she's trying to prove something to everyone." He sighed. "I don't know. Maybe she is, but it's hard to tell with her. She's always been about appearances. She wants to show that she's better than everyone else. I just wish she would find peace, you know?" I agreed. It seemed like Sarah's whole life was built on the idea of being superior to everyone around her. She couldn't accept that happiness wasn't something you could force. It had to come from within. As we returned to the reception, I noticed Sarah was surrounded by her friends, talking about her new life and what she was planning to do next. But something in her eyes was different now. There was no joy, only a need to keep up the facade. I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She had everything she wanted, but she still seemed empty. Later that evening, after the cake cutting and dancing had died down, my husband and I decided to leave. As we walked out of the venue, I could hear Sarah laughing in the background, trying to sound happy, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that this new chapter in her life was only going to bring more trouble. The next few days passed in a blur, and life returned to some semblance of normalcy. But Sarah's presence still loomed large. She started texting me more frequently, telling me about her new adventures with her husband, the new places they were visiting, and the things they were buying. It felt like she was trying to rub it in, but I just ignored her. I had my own life now, my own family, and I wasn't about to let her interfere with it. A few months after the wedding, I got a phone call from my husband. "Sarah needs us," he said, his voice serious. "She's in some kind of trouble." My heart sank. I knew this wasn't going to end well. When we arrived at her apartment, we found out that things weren't as perfect as Sarah had made them seem. Her husband had been involved in some shady business dealings, and now they were facing legal issues. The money they had been living off wasn't as solid as they thought, and they were in danger of losing everything. I stood there, watching Sarah break down in front of me, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt pity. All the things she had done, all the ways she had tried to tear me down, seemed so small now. She was in over her head, and there was no one left to help her. My husband turned to me, his face pale. "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. I knew that helping her would mean giving up our own peace, but I also knew that I couldn't turn my back on her completely. She might have been cruel to me, but she was still family. And family, no matter how broken, deserved a chance at redemption. The days following Sarah's crisis were filled with a strange mix of emotions. I still couldn't believe that everything she had worked so hard for, her seemingly perfect life, was crumbling down around her. It felt surreal. Here she was, once the girl who had everything, and now she was struggling to keep it all together. I watched as my husband tried to comfort her, but he was equally confused and frustrated. He had always wanted the best for his sister, but this situation was more complicated than we could have ever anticipated. At first, I didn't know what to feel. My sympathy for her was tainted by everything she had put me through. She had been cruel, manipulative, and selfish for so long, and now I was expected to help her? It didn't seem fair. But I also knew that life wasn't always black and white. People made mistakes, and sometimes, those mistakes could be the wake-up call they needed to change. When we sat down with her and her husband, it was clear that the situation was more serious than I had imagined. Sarah's husband, Ryan, had been involved in some bad business decisions. He had taken risks, and now the debts were piling up. There was talk of possible legal action, and they were desperate to find a way out. They didn't have the money to pay off their debts, and their future was uncertain. It was hard to ignore the fact that Sarah was now the one who was asking for help, something I never thought I would see. My husband, being the kind-hearted person he was, immediately wanted to help. "I'll talk to some of my contacts," he said. "Maybe we can work something out." But I could tell he was struggling with the decision. After everything Sarah had done, it was hard for him to find it in himself to offer her the help she needed. I, on the other hand, didn't know what to say. My instincts screamed at me to walk away, to let her face the consequences of her actions. But I also knew that if we didn't help her, she could end up losing everything. And despite all the pain she had caused me, a part of me didn't want to see her fall. We had both been through enough hardship in life, and I wasn't sure I could live with the guilt of knowing that I had turned my back on her. The next few days were spent in a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings with lawyers, and discussions about what could be done to save their home and business. My husband and I were stretched thin, both emotionally and financially. We had already given them so much, but now it seemed like we were being asked to sacrifice even more. I could see the toll it was taking on my husband. He was trying to be the rock for everyone, but I could tell he was becoming overwhelmed. It was clear that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about family, loyalty, and forgiveness. As the days went by, I began to notice a shift in Sarah. She seemed more vulnerable than I had ever seen her before. She wasn't the same confident, arrogant person I had known. Now she was scared and uncertain, constantly second-guessing herself. It was almost as if she was realizing that her actions had consequences, that there was a price to pay for the way she had treated people in the past. She started apologizing to me, really apologizing. Not the half-hearted, manipulative apologies I was used to, but real, heartfelt ones. "I was wrong," she told me one night after we had finished talking to the lawyer. "I know I hurt you, and I don't know how to make up for it." I didn't know what to say. For the first time, I saw the person behind the arrogance. I saw someone who was genuinely sorry for the way they had acted. I wasn't ready to forgive her yet. It was going to take time. But I could see that she was trying, and that was something I hadn't expected. It felt like a small step toward healing, even if it was just a tiny one. Maybe she was finally starting to understand that the world didn't revolve around her, that she couldn't keep pushing people away without facing the consequences. My husband and I spent countless hours discussing what to do. We both knew that helping Sarah would mean putting our own lives on hold. It wasn't an easy decision, but in the end, we decided that we couldn't just walk away. We had to do what we could to help her get back on her feet. But we also made it clear that we couldn't keep enabling her. This had to be the last time we were asked to step in. If she was going to move forward, it was going to have to be on her own terms, with her taking responsibility for her actions. As the days turned into weeks, things slowly began to improve. Sarah and Ryan worked together to pay off their debts, with a little help from us, of course. But it wasn't just the financial aspect that was changing. Sarah started to change too. She stopped trying to keep up the act of being perfect. She began to show more empathy, more understanding, and more gratitude for the people around her. I still wasn't sure where all of this would lead. I didn't know if Sarah was really changing, or if this was just a phase. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better between us. Maybe we could finally move past the bitterness and hurt that had been festering for so long. I wasn't ready to let go of the past just yet, but I was open to the possibility of a better future. Maybe Sarah and I would never be the closest of friends, but we could at least be civil, at least be family in the truest sense of the word. And that, I realized, was all I could ask for. The healing process was slow, but it was happening. I didn't expect things to be perfect, but I knew that as long as we kept working on it, we could find a way to move forward. As Sarah and Ryan worked their way out of debt, it was clear that the experience had changed them. Sarah, in particular, seemed to soften in a way I'd never seen before. She still had her moments. Old habits die hard, but more and more, she started showing gratitude for the help we had given her. She began to take on more responsibilities, and for the first time, she seemed determined to stand on her own 2 feet. It was a stark contrast to the person who once expected everything to be handed to her without question. I could tell my husband felt relieved to see his sister making progress. He wasn't the type to hold grudges, and his forgiving nature allowed him to look past her past mistakes. I admired that about him, but I wasn't there yet. I still carried the weight of everything she'd put me through, all the times she'd belittled me or demanded more than I could give. Her apologies were a start, but trust is something that has to be rebuilt, brick by brick, and I wasn't ready to start construction just yet. One day, Sarah asked me if I'd be willing to meet for coffee, just the 2 of us. "I want to talk, woman to woman," she said, her voice free from the usual arrogance. "I want to apologize properly." I agreed, but I wasn't sure what to expect. When we sat down, she surprised me by being completely honest. She admitted to the many ways she had hurt me, owned up to her selfishness, and even thanked me for being patient with her when she didn't deserve it. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. A part of me wanted to stay guarded, to hold on to the hurt as a shield against being hurt again. But another part of me, one that I didn't realize had been growing, wanted to let go, just a little. "I appreciate that you're trying," I said finally. "But it's going to take time." She nodded. I understand. I just hope we can start fresh someday. Those words stayed with me. Starting fresh seemed like a long shot, but the idea of it wasn't as unthinkable as it had been a few months earlier. Maybe Sarah really was changing. Maybe she was finally learning that relationships aren't built on manipulation or demands, but on trust and mutual respect. As the months passed, Sarah's financial situation stabilized. She and Ryan moved to a smaller apartment, downsized their lifestyle, and started living within their means. Sarah took on a job that, while far from glamorous, was steady and allowed her to contribute to their household. She even started reaching out to old friends, not to brag, but to reconnect. Slowly but surely, she was rebuilding her life. Meanwhile, my husband and I focused on our own goals. We found a rhythm that worked for us, and for the first time in years, our lives felt calm and steady. The drama that had once consumed so much of our time was now a faint memory, and we both appreciated the peace. We spent more time together, took trips we had always dreamed about, and made plans for the future that didn't involve cleaning up someone else's mess. One evening, Sarah called and invited us over for dinner. Nothing fancy, she promised. Just a quiet meal to say thank you. I was hesitant at first, but my husband thought it would be a good step toward healing. So we went. When we arrived, the atmosphere was different, warm and welcoming. Sarah greeted us with a genuine smile, and the evening was surprisingly pleasant. She didn't brag, didn't fish for compliments, and didn't make any demands. She was just Sarah. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe around her. By the time we left, I realized that something had shifted. I wasn't fully ready to forgive and forget, but I wasn't carrying the same level of resentment either. Sarah had changed, and though I was cautious, I was willing to meet her halfway. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about finding a way to move forward. And for the first time, I felt like that was possible. With time, the tension that had once defined my relationship with Sarah began to lift. Slowly, she became more self-sufficient, relying less on others to fix her problems and more on her own determination to improve. I still kept my distance emotionally, not quite ready to let my guard down completely, but I no longer braced myself for conflict every time she called or visited. Instead, her interactions with us started to feel almost normal, sometimes even pleasant. Meanwhile, my husband and I thrived in the newfound stability. For the first time in years, we could focus on our own future without the constant interference of family drama. We made plans, discussed dreams we had put off for far too long, and genuinely enjoyed the peace that had been missing from our lives. One evening, over a quiet dinner at home, my husband brought up a topic we hadn't discussed in a while. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" he asked carefully. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "Forgiveness is complicated," I said. "I'm not sure I'll ever forget what happened, but I don't feel the same anger I used to. She's changed a lot. Maybe that's enough for now." He nodded, understanding that healing is a process, not a single decision. "You know," he said, "I think you've shown her a lot of grace, more than she probably realizes. It's made her a better person." His words stayed with me. I hadn't thought of it that way, but maybe he was right. By standing firm and not allowing her to keep taking advantage of us, we had given Sarah the space to grow up. And grow up she did, though not without stumbles. There were still moments when she slipped back into old habits, but those instances became rarer as the months passed. Eventually, Sarah and I reached a kind of unspoken understanding. We weren't best friends, and I didn't think we ever would be. But we could sit together at family gatherings without tension, share polite conversation, and even laugh at a shared joke now and then. I still kept some emotional distance, but it was no longer out of fear, more a matter of protecting the calm I had worked so hard to find. In the end, what mattered most wasn't the specifics of our past, but the way we moved forward. Sarah wasn't the same person she had been years ago, and while I couldn't fully erase the hurt she had caused, I found that I didn't need to. What I needed was peace, and I had finally found it. I wasn't entirely sure what the future held, but I felt ready to face it, with or without Sarah in my corner.